in my kingdom, I was finally there to sit on my throne as the prince of MultiVersus.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Lost Engine Outpost. My name is Spada, and welcome back to the MultiVersus Living Roster, the only roster prediction determined entirely by an online community. If you're new, I'll quickly say that throughout this video, I will provide you with 5 options for properties that I think are most likely to show up in MultiVersus at launch, and then hopefully you will vote in one of 2 polls which of the 5 you personally think is most likely. This is all informed by community participation, so that means that the larger that we can get this community, the better. So do me a favor and like the video, subscribe to be a part of the community, and also just get involved down in the comments. I try to reply when I can. Alright, and with that out of the way, the topic today is WB-owned sitcoms. I did a bunch of research before I compiled the list of shows we're discussing today, but there's likely something I've overlooked. If there is anything that I say throughout the video that you think you have the research to prove is wrong, just let me know what I'm wrong about and try to provide me with a source. I gotta say, this is a topic I'm super pumped to talk about, mostly because I grew up watching these shows that we're discussing today, and for a few of the more modern ones, where I was already an adult when they came out, I've even watched most of those as well. As a kid, I grew up in the 90s, so sitcoms have always been a steady portion of my media diet. Now, as excited as I am to get on to the main topic, we do have some house cleaning to take care of for those of you that have been a part of this community for any amount of time. So let's go ahead and discuss the results from last episode. Then we can move on to discussing the 5 options of sitcoms. Last week, I asked you all which cartoon franchise you thought would be most likely represented in MultiVersus at launch. I compiled a list of 5 of the most popular cartoon shows and included a couple that I thought would be interesting, but maybe a little less likely, those being Cow and Chicken and Ed, Edd and Eddy. My hope was to at least see if there was any general opinion about wanting them in the game, but I was fairly certain it was going to come down to the other 3. In either case, here are the poll results. See, at the end of the last episode, I said to you all that I wasn't sure at all who you guys would pick, but I must say I am a little bit surprised that more of you didn't vote for Courage the Cowardly Dog or Dexter. Having said that, I'm super pumped to be adding Powerpuff Girls to the living roster. It's absolutely one of my favorite cartoons. And as you can see, and as seems to be typical, it wasn't even close in the vote. This is also the largest number of voters that we've ever had in a single poll, so I gotta say thank you to everyone for participating. Alright, and with that, let's go ahead and get Powerpuff Girls into the living roster. This portrait's going to be a little hard for me to make because I gotta find a way to include all 3 into a tiny square, but hopefully I've come up with a graphic that looks believable and appealing for you guys. And while we're looking at it, I am leaving off the class icon this time. Most of the time I do like to fill it in, but this time I'd like you guys to decide what you think is most likely to be the option of class for them. So let me know down in the comments. Okay, now I think it's time that we move on to the main event of today's show. So as I've mentioned today, we're going to be talking about sitcoms, some of which originally aired a fairly long time ago. Family Matters started in the 80s, and then The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air and Friends both came out in the 90s. And then there are 2 more modern shows that began in the 2000s, those being 2.5 Men and Big Bang Theory. Now, I don't have the time to really focus on providing a full history for each of the shows, but I'll explain how I think each property could be incorporated in a game like MultiVersus. Now, since these are all sitcoms with little to no actual fighting involved in the shows, these characters' inclusions would have to be super creative, but my view on it is, if Nickelodeon All-Stars can incorporate characters like Helga and Garfield into their platform fighter, I would argue that Player First Games has the creativity necessary to get these kinds of properties the proper representation in MultiVersus. So let's go ahead and talk about them in order of release. To start with, we're going to talk about Family Matters. Now, the show itself mostly follows the family of the Winslows, whose patriarch leads the family as a cop. But the show does a great job of showing each family member's day-to-day life, and frequently in incredibly endearing and clever ways. But I don't foresee any of the Winslows being the characters chosen to represent the show. Instead, I think it would be their neighbor, everyone's favorite dork, Steve Urkel. Now, if you don't know him, his character's involvement was mostly to serve as a foil for the family, constantly showing up with the best of intentions, but often creating problems much worse than what he stumbled into. All of these hijinks would be followed up with Urkel's catchphrase, "Did I do that?" What makes Urkel's implementation fun is that he has a lot of accidents that occurred in the show that could make really good moves in a moveset. But beyond that even, and using his foolishness to create offensive opportunities, there's also his transformation he achieved later on in the series, Stefan. That's right, Urkel had his very own shonen transformation that increased his muscles, his charisma, and his physical prowess. This version of him is suave and capable. I think this would serve as a great stance change for a support or mage character whose main objective is normally to keep an opponent busy and distracted while his teammate pops in for the KO. But his Stefan stance could also grant him the strength to overtake opponents in a more one-on-one bout if the matchup calls for it. Now on to The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, the show that I'd be most excited about. Now, we could really use any number of the characters from the show, but I can't imagine a single reason to use anyone but the Fresh Prince himself. In the show, there are actually quite a few events where Will shows his athleticism in ways that could be shown off in a platform fighter like this. You could easily reference him playing basketball, or specific episodes like the one he spends trying to make money in a pool hall by giving him an attack with a pool stick. He could utilize his iconic dance moves as simple taunts or as buffs for him and his teammate, as well as debuffs for their opponents. Then he could very easily also incorporate moves that summon characters like Jazzy or Carlton to provide additional assistance. Not to mention, this gives player-first games the ability to reference all the iconic different outfits from the show, and beyond that maybe even some of Will Smith's iconic WB characters throughout the years. And then there's the other 90s show, Friends. This one is one that I actually feel has a pretty reasonable likelihood of at least making an appearance in the game, but given that the show doesn't really have a main character and generally grants even episode length to each of the 5 friends, it's hard to imagine which would be most likely to be representing the show. But if I was forced to guess, I would say it would probably be Monica Geller. The reason for this is that she's the character that has some of the most aggro moments in the show, from her freakouts about cleanliness to her OCD nature in the kitchen.
Do you want me to cry? Is that what you want? Do you want to see me cry? Sir, no, sir!
I think you could pretty easily come up with enough attacks and moves to justify her inclusion, not to mention how funny it would be to see a cartoonified Courtney Cox yelling at random characters like Arya Stark and Shaggy for their often odd food choices. That leaves us with 2 more shows. With these last 2, I want to start with 2.5 Men, and this one is the one I think is probably least likely to get in. Charlie Sheen has become quite a controversial figure in recent years, and for pretty good reason, but I guess there's always the ability to use Alan or the Kid, but even this seems to be stretching it. However, given that 2.5 Men is one of the most popular sitcoms of all time, it's really hard to make an episode like this and not at least give them a spot. Okay, and that leaves us with the final show. Funnily enough, having the same creator as 2.5 Men, Chuck Lorre. Big Bang Theory. Now, I know this one might be controversial. The show really did garner a significant amount of hate from the internet the longer the show went on, and honestly, I get why. The longer the show went on, the humor started to get pretty lazy, frankly, but in the early days of the show, I found it earnest and funny and a hilarious view into a bit of nerd culture that was often mocked by society or simply misunderstood. Now, it could be argued that the show didn't really help with that, but I'm getting away from the topic at hand, so let's go ahead and focus on how I think the show could work in a game like MultiVersus. I think you could probably grab any character from the show and make something functional, but I don't think there's any real way you can do the show any justice unless you have Sheldon Cooper be the representative. And what makes him such an interesting and exciting choice is his sheer factual encyclopedic knowledge for everything nerdy. This could allow him to reference other characters from other WB properties that maybe don't stand as good a chance of getting into the roster because of some franchises being overly represented. Namely, this could allow for characters from DC, Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, or others to inspire some of his moveset. The way I imagine it, Sheldon might don a quick Flash costume and get a dash through stun attack while he's in it, or maybe he has a button that turns him into Green Lantern and gives him a quick ground slam or even a crazy air spike. I think there's some potentially really fun and interesting ways that you could utilize a character like Sheldon Cooper. Now, from all the shows, the one I'm most hoping makes it in is The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. But just because that's what I want most doesn't mean that's what's most likely. I also expect that this topic is going to be pretty divisive, and people may feel inclined to hit that caps lock button and comment on something along the lines of, "Oh my god, there's no way they would add sitcoms." But this is genuinely something that I think is possible, and I think I provided good enough reason in this episode for that. So with that, which of the shows do you expect would get represented in MultiVersus? Family Matters, The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Friends, 2.5 Men, or Big Bang Theory? You can either vote on the community page of this channel, where the poll will be at the top of the page, and while you're there, don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. And the other would be a third-party site called Straw Poll. The link to this poll you can find in the description of the video or in the comments below, pinned to the top of the comment section. Alright, and since this episode is surely long enough, I'm going to go ahead and call it there. I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode. Let me know what you have to say. Thanks for coming by, and until next time, later.